Well, just about everything we've been told about the 9/11 attacks has been a lie, of course. One of the biggest lies is that a group of Muslims with almost no flying experience somehow hijacked 4 airliners, flew 2 of them into the Twin Towers, 1 of them into the Pentagon, 1 of them into a field in western Pennsylvania. We, of course, now know that didn't happen. Captain Dan Hanley is a former 25-year United Airlines pilot, 10-year U.S. Naval aviator before that. He serves as director and international public spokesperson for the global grassroots effort called the 9/11 Pilot Whistleblowers. And Captain Dan is revealing what exactly happened on that day with those aircraft. And he joins us now. Captain, welcome to the show. Great to have you here on Redacted.
Great to be here. I feel a privilege to have you having me on the program. Thank you, Clayton. And thank you for your courage and do what you do.
Well, thank you for your courage and coming forward on this. So I'm sure this is probably not a popular opinion among other major airline company pilots to be talking about this. We've interviewed a number of pilots who've come forward on a variety of issues, and it's always sort of frowned upon to talk about it. So, of course, you came to this and have started talking about this over the past couple of years, past number of years, and put a ton of work and research into this. What was the moment for you that you decided to come forward and talk about this?
Well, actually, the uninterruptible autopilot that we're going to be discussing, a group of pilots, and I kind of spearheaded the effort, but a group of us pilots got together and decided that we knew too much about the lies of 9/11 with regard to the pilots. So that's why when we created the grassroots group, because if you go back to the 9/11 Commission, not one pilot was permitted to testify before the commission as to the absurdity of this ludicrous notion that these hijackers flew the aircraft. So this is our intent, to come forth with information that we've collected by creating the group.
It's unbelievable. So just for a second here. So I read the 9/11 Commission report, of course, and it's unbelievable to me that no pilots, were pilots coming forward offering to speak to Congress as part of the Commission report? How did that go that they were denied?
Well, there's a guy named Philip Zelikow who is the executive director of the 9/11 Commission. He was the filter for the commission. He ensured that the pilots weren't allowed to testify. I don't know if any other pilots came forward, but when I heard back while the commission was going on, the lack of experience of these pilots, I said, hang on, it's not possible. So I could talk to you about the purpose of our organization and what we're doing, Clayton, and give people an idea on where we're headed.
So let's do that. So 9/11 Pilot Whistleblowers, this organization, what exactly does the organization do, and how many pilots do you have in this organization?
Well, we have thousands of pilots that have come to us from around the world via the Join Us page on our website, but I don't know the specific number of late. But the purpose of our organization is to show that there were no Muslim hijackers at the controls of the 9/11 aircraft, but that the aircraft were electronically hijacked and remotely controlled through employment of a system called the uninterruptible autopilot that enables a remote source to take complete control of the aircraft autopilot and flight management computer and fly it to its designated target, whether that be another airport or into a building. Now, once this system is engaged, the pilots can't disconnect it. And one of the goals of our organization has been to recruit highly trained and experienced pilots, both active and retired military or civilian pilots from around the world, who will attest to the fact that not only could the hijackers not have flown the flight profiles, but they could not have flown them themselves. So we've got video interviews on our website you can look at under pilot interviews. But some people are challenged to believe that a large commercial jet could be remotely controlled. Well, if you look at the remote control of aircraft, the history, it goes back 80 years to 1944, towards the end of World War II, when the U.S. Army Air Corps launched Operation Aphrodite in Europe, in the UK to be specific. What they did was take gutted out old B-17s to lighten the weight of the aircraft and loaded them with 30,000 pounds of Torpex, which was an incendiary compound. And pilots were required to make the takeoff, but once they got airborne, these aircraft were remotely guided at targets in Europe. So this was 80 years ago this technology was available. And this is one of the first examples of a military drone aircraft. But we could cite a bunch of examples, but due to time constraints, I'll just give you one more. In 1984, 17 years before 9/11, NASA and the FAA conducted a joint crash test experiment in a remote location where they took a huge Boeing 720 commercial jet aircraft, loaded it up with with cameras and crash dummies, because they wanted to test crew and passenger survivability in the event of a crash landing. They flew this aircraft by remote control around the pattern several times before intentionally crash landing it. So if you jump ahead to the early to mid 90s is when we can start talking about the uninterruptible autopilot system I mentioned. Now there's a Wikipedia article.
I was going to say it's amazing to me. I've never heard this before. Operation Aphrodite, 1944, using remote control to pilot these aircraft. And then over the decades, refining that technology. So it's amazing to me. So anyone could sit there and say in 2000, on the 9/11 attacks, that we don't have that technology. Well, absolutely we do. So sorry, you were going to say about a Wikipedia page about this this autopilot program. Can you talk about that?
Sure. To give credence to what I'm saying, there is a Wikipedia article. If you just Google uninterruptible autopilot, you get it. But if you want to be more specific, Boeing, Honeywell, uninterruptible autopilot, this Wikipedia article pops up. It's not all that long, but it's somewhat misleading. It does state that its purpose is to prevent would-be hijackers from commandeering a commercial jet aircraft in flight by remotely taking control of it and flying to one of many airports in the world to auto-land it. So if you stumbled across this article, it goes on to say it was patented in 2006, 5 years after 9/11. That's the misleading part, because we've had informants come forward and say, whoa, wait a minute, this system was developed and produced in the early to mid 90s, and we know that this technology has been undergoing development for decades. And if you look at the Global Hawk and Predator drones, they were secretly rolled out during the same time frame. So they did have the expertise, they did have the technology to fly these airplanes by remote control. I talked with one person who was an avionics technician who actually worked on this in 1996. And I won't mention names because that's dangerous to do, but we have credible witnesses and evidence that it was available before 9/11.
So you're telling me you're telling me that Wikipedia is inaccurate, a website that's run by the deep state. I'm shocked. I'm shocked by by that.
Yeah,
I also love that whenever we cover 9/11, by the way, I should just point this out, on YouTube always puts a disclaimer underneath one of our videos, and it always links to Wikipedia. So just so you understand what we're talking about here in terms of Wikipedia and their authenticity and accuracy, Captain Dan. So I just want to ask you about this autopilot program. Do we know, have you been able to verify that these autopilot programs were on these 4 different aircraft, or at least the 2 that crashed into the Twin Towers? Do we know that for certain?
No, but if you look at the hijackers, particularly Hani Hanjour, the one that supposedly flew American 77 in the Pentagon, you come to the conclusion that there can be no viable alternative explanation as to how American 77 hit the Pentagon, if that's in fact what happened. Because this navigation system on today's modern commercial jet aircraft is extremely accurate. It was derived from cruise missile technology anyhow, and is accurate down to a few meters. And this is evidence when the weather goes below certain visibility minimums, pilots are required to let the airplane land itself because it does a better job than the pilots. So
wow.
If I could, I'd like to talk about Hani Hanjour if I could, because
please.
There's a cover-up with the government here, and it's a pretty important one. But Hani Hanjour was a 29-year-old Saudi Arabian hijacker who came to the States in the mid-90s to take flight training. And it was well documented that he was a very poor student. New York Times, Chicago Tribune reported, ABC News reported it, and there are other outlets that reported it as well. Well, he was such a poor student that when he left the States, returned to Saudi Arabia, and came back just prior to 9/11 and tried to enroll in one of the previous schools he had attended, and they wouldn't take him because they didn't want to waste assets on him. So what was the maneuver he supposedly performed? American 77 took off from Washington Dulles heading for the West Coast, got to cruise altitude for a while before making an about-face turn back into Washington, started a descent, and at 7,000 feet, it commenced this descending, accelerating corkscrew turn, 330 degrees, to arrive precisely at the surface at over 500 miles an hour without striking the surface. And the airplane drove in to the Pentagon just above ground level without striking it to hit it on its first attempt. Okay, so what's wrong with this picture? We've been led to believe Hanley Hanger, this poor student who was trained mainly in Cessna aircraft, could fly this 100-ton 757 in this spectacular stunt. But it gets better. This same maneuver was replicated in a simulator and flown by another grassroots group called Pilots for 9/11 Truth. And highly experienced pilots attempted it, and they crashed the simulator. And yet Hanley did it on its first attempt. But it gets better.
Let me ask you real quick. You're a 35-year veteran United Airlines pilot, 10 years naval aviator.
Right.
Could you pull off that maneuver? How difficult would it be for you?
I couldn't, and I'm not embarrassed to admit it. I couldn't have pulled off because the replication in the simulator proved that it's humanly impossible to fly this maneuver. The trick is getting the airplane down to the surface that low at that speed and holding it there without skidding the surface. And it's just impossible. It's ridiculous that they sold us this story that Hanley Hanger did it, but it gets better, Clayton. Hanley Hanger went to the Freeway Airport in Bowie, Maryland 1 month prior to 9/11 and wanted to run a single-engine little prop job, a Cessna 172. But when you show up at an airport and they don't know you, you've got to demonstrate you can fly before they'll rent you a plane, and you've got to go up on an evaluation flight. Well, Hanley Hanger went up on 3 evaluation flights in 2 days with a woman named Sheila Baxter and a guy named Ben Connor. And they came back and reported to Marcel Bernard, the chief pilot at this airport, the head instructor, saying, don't run him the airplane, he can't handle it, a single engine. This is a month prior to 9/11. So what did Hanger do? He goes down the road to Gaithersburg, Maryland, to another fixed base operator, Congressional Air Charter, and goes up flying with a guy named Eddie Shalev, who came back from his evaluation flight saying, yeah, he's a good pilot. Now, who was Eddie Shalev? He was an Israeli who served in the Israeli Defense Force and showed up in the States a few months prior to 9/11 and contracted out with Congressional Air Charter. So the 9/11 Commission sends a staffer out, and the FBI sends agents out to interview all 4 of these pilots, the 3 at Freeway and Eddie Shalev. And Ben Connor, the guy that flew with him out of Freeway, thought he was going to get a call from the 9/11 Commission to come in and testify, but the call never came. So what appeared in the 9/11 Commission final report? Only Eddie Shalev's testimony that he was a good pilot, and it appeared but an end note and mentioning Eddie Shalev's name only once. So we know that the FBI and the 9/11 Commission suppressed this critical evidence that Hanley Hanger could not fly. So that's why we say if Hanley Hanger, we know he didn't fly American 77. We know something struck the Pentagon. We'll say it was American 77. How did it get there? This was a question I posed to the FAA. They said, you haven't proven the uninterruptible autopilot was used that day. I said, yeah, but we showed that Hanley Hanger couldn't fly. And he said, the FAA doesn't conduct criminal investigations, go to the Department of Justice, which we have done. As a matter of fact, we've written every relevant level and branch of the U.S. government, petitioning them to investigate our allegations that the uninterruptible autopilot was used on 9/11, and we've been stonewalled all on the way by every one of them, from the president, the director of national intelligence, the attorney general, the assistant attorney general, criminal division, FBI, and the FAA. So they all just ignore us. We've sent letters and emails. We've made phone calls that went unreturned. So we actually went outside the states, and I don't know, we decided that the biggest community that was harmed on the planet Earth was the Muslim community, because Islamophobia is still rampant, because they claim Muslim hijackers did 9/11, which we're out to prove wasn't the case. So we did go to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and said, hey, look, not only do we have evidence, but there's other groups out here that also have it. Why don't you establish an international Islamic commission for 9/11 inquiry, a Muslim 9/11 commission? No response. Went to the Muslim World League, same thing. Went to all these Muslim organizations. We went to the Minister of Foreign Affairs to different Muslim countries. Nobody's interested. And the evidence is all there. So
why do you think they're uninterested? When you're talking about, you have this former IDF soldier from Israel who signs off on this guy when these other individuals would not. He ends up in the 9/11 Commission report. The other two that said he can't even fly this thing were left out of the 9/11 Commission report. So who do you think was responsible for orchestrating? I mean, I know it's a larger question here, but was Israel directly involved then?
Myself and my colleagues believe that 9/11 was planned and executed by Zionist members of the governments of Israel, the United States, possibly the UK and others, through collusion between Mossad, CIA, and others. But when you look at the broader picture, Clayton, it depends upon your worldview. If you want to believe that you have 195 sovereign countries independently operating on their own without pressure being exerted from outside, we believe that the most wealthy, powerful, ruthless subhumans on the planet Earth called in the 9/11 hit. Now, who is that? If you want to think, it was the Jesuits in the Vatican, the Black Pope, the Rothschild cabal, Committee of 300. You can go on and on with the
right.
Council on Foreign Relations. All these different organizations, we believe, had a hand in it. And why did 9/11 occur in general is we believe that it was usher in the New World Order, what we see. And if you look,
I don't disagree with you. I mean, I don't disagree with you at all. In fact, I think that what's the purpose of it, right? It's to have mass surveillance, control, launch the military-industrial complex revolution that led to a permanent war in the Middle East and a war against terror, to go into Iraq, to go into Libya, to use that as a blanket excuse to rally Americans around the cause that Muslims attacked us on 9/11. It's a brilliant strategy. And for those of you who are watching who might be new to this, the way of thinking and not understanding the relationship between Mossad and the CIA, I mean, it goes back many decades, of course. Just look at the USS Liberty and the collusion between the Israeli government and the CIA to attack Americans on the USS Liberty and use that as a false flag in order to launch a war against Egypt. So there's precedent for this. This is not some fantasy. This is well documented. Just ask the veterans of the USS Liberty. They're still outraged and fighting for truth on this. And now you can add in the families and the victims of 9/11 who were used as a false flag attack. So I don't discount that at all. I want to talk about the towers, Dan, if you don't mind. So we talked about the Pentagon.
Sure.
You believe that was remote. Right. Well, actually, before we move to the towers really quick, do you believe that that aircraft struck the Pentagon? Or, as many have speculated, and we even have news clips, I mean, it was a live, if I'm not mistaken, it was a live report on CNN, and I think we have it here. I want to play this, where the reporter says, we see no evidence at all of an aircraft hitting the Pentagon. Watch this.
Actually, it was Bob Franken with an eyewitness who said it appeared that Boeing 757, the American Airlines jet, landed short of the Pentagon. Can you give us any better idea of how much of the plane actually impacted the building?
You know, it might have appeared that way, but from my close-up inspection, there's no evidence of a plane having crashed anywhere near the Pentagon. The only site is the actual side of the building that's crashed in, and as I said, the only pieces left that you can see are small enough that you could pick up in your hand. There are no large tail sections, wing sections, a fuselage, nothing like that anywhere around, which would indicate that the entire plane crashed into the side of the Pentagon and then caused the side to collapse. Now, even though if you look at the pictures of the Pentagon, you see that the floors have all collapsed, that didn't happen immediately. It wasn't until almost about 45 minutes later that the structure was weakened.
So that clip, of course, has been buried on the internet. You can't really find it. It's hard to find. You can see how grainy it actually is. But that happened. There was no evidence. There was no fuselage. There was no pieces of the craft. There was no tail. There was nothing. And that was live on, I believe it was CNN at the time. So what do you think actually struck the Pentagon?
Well, 9/11 pilot whistleblowers really doesn't go there. It's outside our scope and purpose. But I will be viciously attacked if I put a link to this program on social media, because there's so many that believe it was a cruise missile that struck the Pentagon and there was an airborne swap of flight vehicles. But then we have to ask the question, if it was a cruise missile, what happened to American 77 crew and passengers? And we allege in that instance that it was electronically hijacked and flown somewhere else where we don't know.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Again, whatever happened to that aircraft then? I mean, if we have evidence that it's somewhere in the ocean, we don't know. Again, but I would be happy to share that here on the show. I have no agenda in this at all. I'm just showing you the video of this news report. And of course, people have the only surveillance footage where you see, which doesn't even look like an aircraft. It looks like a cruise missile hitting the Pentagon. So it's hard to say. But then again, to your point, where is that aircraft? But we'll leave that for now. I think your testimony and points about not being able to actually pilot the aircraft into the Pentagon by a human being is pretty powerful. I mean, it's earth-shattering, in fact. So now let's talk about the Twin Towers, if you wouldn't mind, Captain, and tell us what you think happened to the Twin Towers and how those aircraft managed to strike the Twin Towers.
Well, there we go with another attack on airplanes hit the Twin Towers, because there's a group of people out there that believe CGI and holograms were employed and that there were no airplanes on 9/11. And again, I say, well, then what happened to American 11 in 9/175 if that happened? So, but we believe, if you stick with the official story, those two airplanes struck the towers. And the amazing thing about all three of these airplanes were they all happened with military precision, cruise missile accuracy on their first attempt by these rookies. That all by itself is pretty fantastic. But if you look at the Twin Towers, they were 208 feet wide, and the wingspan on a 767 is 156 feet. So there wasn't much room for error. If they had been a few degrees off heading, they could have missed the towers altogether. And at that closure rate and that speed, we say these guys couldn't have done it. And I actually saw a video a few years ago. A group of pilots got together, only it was a 747 simulator that they used instead of a 767, and they couldn't do it, not at that speed. It's akin to having driven your family car for a year and then hopping into a huge 18-wheeler, semi-tractor trailer, get it up to a high speed and try to drive it through a garage without scraping the sides of the truck. That's how accurate they had to have been to hit those things. So we say it wasn't impossible, really wasn't possible for these inexperienced pilots to have done it.
So once again, I'll ask you, as a 35-year veteran of the United Airlines, do you think you could have struck the towers given at some point in your career, 35 years later, sort of at the beginning as a rookie? How easy would it have been for you as a veteran?
It wouldn't have been, and I wasn't a fighter pilot. I flew P-3 Orions in the Navy, but I interviewed some Pakistan Air Force fighter pilots that have flown every plane under the sun. They go, hey, Dan, You do not get in a jet aircraft and without having practiced targeting many months and hit a target like that. And I asked them, could you have done it? And they said, definitely not on the first try. So I can't speak from experience as far as, but we all believe that it would be very difficult, if not impossible, for experienced pilots to have done it.
So when you say not first try, we might have then seen lots of video of them maybe circling the towers or trying to hit it and maybe having to pull up and try again because they just couldn't get the heading right. It's traveling at that speed on that like little bit of a target in the screen, right? Is that what you mean? We might see them trying to do it multiple times?
Well, they didn't have a chance to do it multiple times. They only had the first time they tried it, they did it and hit it accurately. And we're saying they just couldn't have done it.
Yeah. So you believe, once again, is this autopilot program that was used and controlled by the CIA, Mossad, in collaboration, the UK government, somebody, to spark this massive permanent war on terror that, of course, has now brought in trillions of dollars, and has wiped Iraq off the map, has destabilized the entire Middle East. You always look like who benefits the most from this, right? Who benefits the most from having us be in a permanent, nonstop war on terror, of course, and it's easy to see, right? You don't even need a third grade education to figure that out. So do you believe that this was the autopilot program used once again and remotely controlled smashing into the towers?
Yes. You know, again, I'm going to get crucified by the no plane people out there, but yes, I personally believe that they use the uninterruptible autopilot to fly the airplane in the towers. I mean, there's a photograph of United 175 just prior to impact, and 4 different photographs from independent photographers, including CNN, that showed a pod on the bottom of the aircraft. And a 767 doesn't have that pod, and that couldn't have been United 175. So if those photographs were legitimate, the airplane was swapped out somehow and replaced, some people say, by a military-grade aircraft, and that pod on the bottom may have been part of the uninterruptible autopilot system. But that can't be proven. Those are all hypotheses out there, and 9/11 pilot whistleblowers, much to the chagrin and frustration of our critics, doesn't go there. We don't address that. We know the hijackers couldn't have flown them, and the only viable alternative explanation is this system.
So a system taking over, flying these with precision directly into the towers. You know, because for the people that say, well, there was no aircraft, what happened to the passengers who were on those flights that day, who, you know, booked travel?
They can't answer that question.
Right,
can't
families
answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, that's what stands out to me, right? I mean, look, I'm open. Right. I'm the most open person in the world. So if you can prove to me that there were no aircraft that day, I'm all ears. But there are the families who lost their loved ones who were on those flights that day, who booked flights. I think you even had a member of the federal government who was on the wife of the member of the federal government who's on board one of those that day. Gone, killed, never to appear again. And then, of course, the aircraft that are gone, where did they disappear to as well? So, yeah, there's a lot of questions I have about that. Captain, there's the one, of course, one aircraft we haven't spoken about, which is the one in Pennsylvania. Let's talk about that flight and what stands out to you about that one that landed in the field in western Pennsylvania.
Well, some people say the same thing. The plane didn't land there when it was remotely guided over to Chicago or Cleveland. So people get into the same argument. But I have a good friend that did extensive Freedom of Information Act requests and obtained information that shows that the debris field that included both airplane parts and body parts was strewn over a 70-acre area, which would, to me, indicate that it came apart in the air somehow, either blown up, shot down, or the airplane exceeded its limits and came apart in the air. So for people that say hey, the plane wasn't even there. It took off 45 minutes late from Newark Airport. And when you think about the timeline of events that occurred that day with each of the strikes on the building, perhaps the mission was aborted somehow or it was shot down. But we'll never know. We know the airplane was headed towards Washington, D.C. That's the direction it was headed in. But then they say, hey, wait a minute, there was a smoking hole out in Shanksville. What caused that? I don't know. I can't answer that. There was a smoking hole out there.
Yeah, the Shanksville crash site is also very mysterious, right? You would normally see a tail section. You would normally see a lot of the aircraft, but it's almost all gone, right? There's almost nothing there in that crash site, if memory serves.
Well, the crash site really was a 70-acre area. I believe that it came apart in the air somehow.
So it was shot down.
Whether it was shot down by our own, right. But I can't prove that, which is why I don't go there, because there's conspiracy theories and there's conspiracy facts, and what I've tried to present here tonight is a series of facts. The autopilot existed, the hijackers couldn't have flown it, etc. And we let anyone that reads our website and watches the videos there form their own opinion. We just present these facts and say.
No, I think that's really important. So the facts are this autopilot program did exist. It had been worked on since 1944. These pilots were highly inexperienced and could not have piloted these craft. And we have verbal confirmation of that from individuals who were going to lend them a Cessna and said, no, this person cannot handle this. There's no way from pilot testimony that this person could have done this corkscrew pattern and launched a Flight 77 into the Pentagon. Verifiably impossible. And you've confirmed that among many, many other pilots. Impossible. Also, we know that these individuals who said they would not lease this craft to this pilot were kept out of the 9/11 Commission report. So all of those things are facts. And then I guess you can draw your own conclusions. Was it a cruise missile attack? Other pieces of this? Who was behind it? But when you have an IDF soldier who signs off on this and enters the United States just a few months ahead of time, signs off on this, and he's the only one included in the 9/11 Commission report, that also raises some serious questions. So were there any other facts that we missed that we wanted to put on the table here for our audience?
No, I didn't go into detail about the letters we've written, but they're on our website. If you go to the drop-down menu and click on letters, you can read. I mean, we went out to all these organizations. We went out to different countries, and you can see what we said in the letters. They just don't get a response from these people.
That's unbelievable. Well, Captain Dan Hanley has been my guest. Unbelievable work that you've been doing on this. Of course, here during this anniversary week of 9/11 and the 9/11 attacks, I think many Americans are starting to wake up and understand that everything we've been told about that day has just about been a lie. And the cover-up is massive. Captain, great to see you. Thank you so much for your continued work. And anytime you want to come back here on Redacted, you are always welcome. And to all of the amazing work that your pilots are doing in this regard. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Clayton. And if anyone wants to get in touch with me, I'm on Twitter or X at Dan Hanley 4 and on Facebook at Dan Hanley. So if you want to drop me a note, want to get in touch with me for any reason, that'd be the best way to do it.
Yeah, if anyone has any information. Yeah, my pleasure. I just want to say, if anyone has any information that could help the investigation, any pieces of information that maybe Dan doesn't have, please reach out to him on X, on Twitter. We'll make sure it's linked up here right here on the screen and also in our description. So Dan, thank you so much.
Thank you, and thanks for all you do. You're phenomenal. The reporting that you do, keep it up, Clayton.